thank you for joining us at the ever-improving No Soundbites Allowed podcast. My name is Michael Vasquez. We thank you for joining us in this adventure of describing the politics that go on in our nation on a personal and local level as often as possible, giving you, the audience, more than just 30 seconds to understand what's going on in our nation. We look forward to joining you as we go. Just sit back, enjoy the ride. Please remember, if you like the episodes, like it, share it, let other people know, and if you can, please donate, even if it's $2, even if it's $5, because it all makes a difference. We thank you, and here we go. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us. That's right, this is the No Sound Bites Allowed podcast. I'm so happy to be here with everyone. You guys make it all worthwhile. You're the reason why I do this every week and speak out with you. And I really appreciate that. I thank each and every one of you for that. Now, normally you'll hear my podcast. It usually comes out on Friday. With Saturday, I do a Facebook Live simulcast to be able to hear the questions from you directly about the issues that you think are important every day. And I will be doing the simulcast on Saturday. I'm looking forward to that. And I will be doing a podcast tomorrow, in fact, with Heather L. Micah from the New York State Women's Incorporated, and she'll be talking about women's issues and politics that they deal with. And I'm looking forward to that interview. It's an exclusive here at the No Soundbites Allowed podcast. But the reason why I'm talking today is there's been so much news and so much information. I want to give Heather L. Micah her time to speak without having to anything else interrupting it. But I also want to take a moment, because there's so much news out there, to talk to you about some of the things that have been going on this week. Because it's been an incredible week, quite honestly. This is the week where some people may have seen, and I'm sure most people are aware, President Trump came out to Utica, New York. He was there for a private fundraiser for Claudia Tenney, who's running for that's Congresswoman Claudia Tenney, who's running for the New York 22nd District. It's a re-election campaign. And he came out to support her, to help raise funds for her campaign. Non-official estimates are somewhere in the range of between $100,000 at an absolute minimum, but realistically somewhere around $600,000, possibly $1 million, was raised in one night for that. And that's a huge, huge event. And I want to talk a little bit about, because I was there, I was approved by the White House, one of the few members of the press from the Southern Tier to be approved, to be able to go out and be part of the White House pool who were covering the president when he arrived at Griffiss International Airport. I was able to get coverage of the riots that occurred protests and near riot that happened in Utica, and I'll tell you about my experience with that. And so I want to go over that with you. But there are several other issues going on. I mean, Omarosa and what's going on with that. Obviously, and very publicly, there's a lot of discussion right now about Governor Cuomo and his comments about America never being great, which shouldn't be taken out of context without also addressing his brother, Chris Cuomo, who's on CNN, and his comments about how Antifa and violence is a good thing as long as it's from the left. And that's a very important thing to talk about. And I want to get that out there because it's not getting enough attention. So I want to talk about a couple of these issues. And I also should remind everyone that on Monday, August 20th, I will be making a speech at the Vestal Public Library clock, and going forward from there, should be from 7 till 9. I'll be addressing the red flag legislation, and I believe that based on the research I've done, and it's quite extensive, including the comments that I've received from the state of Connecticut and some information I'm waiting for from the state of Indiana, a couple of lawyers that I'm waiting to have their responses in, plus a bunch of elected officials already. I believe this may be one of the most comprehensive discussions about red flag legislation, not only in New York State, and with an emphasis on New York State, but throughout the entire country. And I don't think most people are aware of what this is or its consequences, and I think it's going to be very important. And I look forward to anyone being there. It's free. There is no obligation there. You can just come on in, hear me speak, and hear about this issue. And you can decide whatever you want about it, but at least you'll be informed, because at this moment, best as I can tell, maybe 5% of all news media in the nation are aware of the red flag legislation, and less than 3% of all politicians that I've spoken to and I'm aware of are even aware of this. So it's really important because there's no one talking about it. So I will discuss that a little bit. But coming back to why am I on today? Let's start with President Trump and the honor of being part of the White House pool of press to be able to cover the president over in Griffiss. It was a very long day on Monday. I was out in Utica, New York, and I started the day, well, I was up for 36 hours, all total. But I started the day at about 5 in the morning, getting out to Utica so that I could arrive and be on WUTQ. Now, by the way, you may hear some background noises, some construction in the area. But I was on WUTQ, which is in Utica. They serve that area. It's a talk radio program. And I was joining their hosts, Jay Aiello and Rocco LaDuca and Mark Wahlberg. And I've talked on that program for 5 years now. So I'm familiar with the Utica area and many of the issues out there. And I was able to speak with them and join their program for half the day. It was actually a wonderful opportunity. I hadn't met the guys in person before, even though I've been speaking with them for 5 years. So I got to have that conversation, get on the program, talk with some of their listeners about what they thought. And overall, the general impression that were coming in by callers and also the guests that came in that day, they were very, very pleased and looking forward to having President Trump in the region to draw attention to Utica, to possibly help improve the view of upstate New York, which overall is kind of negative based on the fact of the economic depression that's been ongoing for well over a decade now, and the number of people who've left the state. That's a lot of the news that's been out there. It's been very negative for upstate New York and especially the central New York, Mohawk Valley, southern tier region. And so they were hoping that President Trump would be able to help turn around that vision because of his presence there. And so they were looking forward to that. Now, beyond that, once we got done there on the show, I went with the news crew over at WUTQ, and we headed on out over to Griffiss International Airport. You may be familiar with that. I've spoken about it before because that's where the drone testing site is, which was approved by Representative Richard Hanna and Assemblyman Anthony Brindisi, State Senator Joe Griffo, and they've spent a total of about $256 million. Again, that's $256 million of your taxes to create a drone testing site that at the last recorded numbers that I can receive from the state of New York, from Assemblyman Anthony Brindisi, from the city of Rome, has created 11 jobs, a total of 11 jobs. So about $23 million per job have been created there. And most recently, the site was denied the national pilot program that it was created for. So the $70 million in tax revenues it was supposed to create isn't happening. The 2,000 jobs that were promised by Anthony Brindisi and Senator Griffo and Representative Richard Hanna when he was in office is not happening. So it's failed in every aspect, much like the Nano Center, much like the Buffalo Billions. It's completely failed, and the money's already spent, and we got nothing for it. But that's the location. So and I've written about and spoken about the Griffiss International Airport and the drone testing site in the past. But so that was where we were at. And I can tell you that it was really, really a great experience to be out there. Now, with the press pool, we were there with the many members of the news media from up north, not just the WUTQ. There was WKTV and Spectrum News. And locally, there was Fox News, Fox 40 News that was there with me, and also News Channel 12 from the Southern Tier region that were there with me. Several of the newspapers, the Utica Observer Dispatch was at the event as well. So there was print media there. And you got to hear the I wish I could publish and really get let people know what was the conversation amongst almost all of the press that were there. Now, there was one news organization from up north that were very negative about the entire event. They were talking very loudly and very publicly about how they didn't like Congresswoman Claudia Tenney, how they were not fans of President Trump, and that they had a very negative view on this entire event. But separate of those four people from one news organization, everyone I was able to speak with were happy about this, that they were looking forward to this, and yet there was a minor segment of the news that were absolutely opposed. And I have to imagine, I've seen some of the reporting that came out reflects that negativity, whereas everyone else was very positive about this. And I can tell you that there were a bunch of people who were invited to be friends and families to be able to greet the president when he came in. And there was about 100 of those individuals. And they were all very, very pleased to be there. And that's separate of the individuals who went over, or actually some of them included individuals who went over to the fundraiser, a private fundraiser thereafter. So that was great. And I can tell you there's nothing like watching all of the security, the Secret Service, the Delta 6, the local police, making sure that everything was safe and ensuring that they were strategically located and seeing their vehicles and the individuals. You knew you were picking the right location, so it was dead center on where Air Force One would come out. You can see this on the video that I provided. It's on YouTube right now, which shows some of the preparations for the event, the president coming out and greeting everyone, and just that whole emotion there. And I also have shortly video of the protest that came afterward, because it's like night and day. We had Claudia Tenney, Representative Claudia Tenney, and her son, who's a Marine Corps captain. He was there, obviously not in uniform, but he was there at the event to be able to greet the president. And, you know, Claudia Tenney, I hear this all the time from news media that say, oh, Claudia Tenney is not able. She doesn't talk to the news media. She's very difficult to speak to or to reach. And in the video, as you can see, she took some time before Air Force One landed to not only talk to the crowd, but she was also talking to the news media. She came right on up to our press area, was speaking to people that she knew, had a little bit of a conversation. It was quite open and available. And I thought it was a very positive event. And the funny thing is then, right after the event, when the press pool was allowed to leave after the presidential motorcade left, which is just huge, and you got to see the president's limo is that's a mini tank. Actually, it's pretty armored up. But, then we went over to Utica, and I was again with WUTQ myself. I saw some of the other news crews from up north, including WIKTV, WKTV, and News Channel 2 from the region were up and waiting for the president to come on by. We're out with the protesters, and it was incredible. We saw this huge group of people out there. Now, there were several hundred people who were in favor of President Trump and in favor of Representative Claudia Tenney and supporters there. And I was on the same side of the street as they were, which was a far quieter, very calm, very quiet. Well, calm as in they weren't trying to initiate anything. They weren't trying to be aggressive about anything. They were just there supporting, and really different experience. There, and the anti-Trump protesters, including many members of Anthony Brindisi's campaign, because they had the signs up saying, hey, Anthony Brindisi, so they were Anthony Brindisi supporters, as well as those who were against the president, were covering a couple streets. We had eyewitnesses that mentioned to us that they had bussed in individuals from well outside the New York 22nd district. They had individuals from Syracuse, from New York City, and other locations, some say from other states, roughly about 1,500, maybe 1,600 individuals, possibly 2,000, that were lining the streets. And they were a riot. They were nearly riotous in how they were screaming, cursing, shouting at any of the supporters and everyone passing by, demanding that President Trump resign, that they had their various issues that they supported, and they had signs alleging everything. I mean, one of the signs that caught my attention immediately was, President Trump eats kittens. Really? Really? He eats kittens. And another one that said, President Trump kicks dogs, puppies, which is just ridiculous. I mean, totally outlandish. They were in outlandish garb and costumes, and just being very, very negative and very violent. And in fact, they were also attacking the GOP. Russian gentleman was walking around with a sign that said G and the Soviet Union symbol of the sickle and hammer, and then the letter P. And he was walking around with this sign, walking over to the supporters. Now, police had made sure that everyone was safe and that they were separated. And yet we saw that gentleman and others from the anti-Trump pro-Brindisi or group coming over and trying to initiate some kind of physicality, some kind of interaction, altercation with the supporters. And I did actually get video of that, where they were coming over and they were trying to cause some kind of reaction. And I have to give it to the supporters. As much as they were being attacked verbally, as much as they were trying to be goaded into trying to do something, the supporters were very, very calm. They really held their ground. They really didn't take the bait that was being presented to them. And it just seems really interesting how, regardless of any businesses that are out there, the supporters of Anthony Brindisi really shut down downtown Utica. They really gave a bad taste in the mouth of many of the residents of Utica, for those who are watching this event, and individuals, I think even many of the Democrats who don't support President Trump for whatever reason, and don't support Congresswoman Claudia Tenney for whatever reason. I don't think most of them would have appreciated the display and the actions of the anti-Trump pro-Brindisi crowd that was there. It was just insulting. And many of those individuals, as we came to find out, were members of Citizen Action and BLM, Black Lives Matters, and Antifa was rumored to be there. And many of the far left fringe of the Democratic Party, and expressing the far left progressive Ocasio-Cortez kind of mentality there. And that's really scary. Really, really scary. And it was a scary event. And I wanted to go over and try and interview some of them, but I have to tell you, I was afraid of that group. I really was. I'm a known Republican, and I'm a known supporter of the Republican Party, Claudia Tenney, President Trump. So it was really trying, and I was really fearful that they were, because the vibe they were giving off, the attitude they were giving, they were looking for something to get them to start a riot, to start some kind of physical action. And I have to give it to the police that they made sure that they, by and large, as much as possible, they kept them separated, and they try to keep it as calm as possible so that no damage to property and no damage to individuals was going to be possible. So that's a good thing. But, you always got to worry because, I was walking through the streets. I'm not familiar with the area. And I was always worried that some of these individuals, these anti-Trump people, were going to come up and do something vicious to me once they figured out I was a Republican. Because a lot of them in the region do know who I am. And so that was a very present fear that I'd turn a corner to try and get to another location, and suddenly they'd come up and do something to me. It was crazy, but I really enjoyed the event, and I had several people that I am aware of, I had spoken to earlier in the day, or I know, that were in the meeting, in the fundraiser with President Trump, and he was, as I'm told, very warm, very welcoming. I couldn't get in because I just couldn't make it in time back to the event. I spoke with a couple of people immediately afterward. They thought it was fantastic. President Trump's outlook on America was great. And his hope to be able to reinvigorate New York State and upstate New York was exactly what we need for this time. So that was some of my initial thoughts about that, first-hand thoughts, having been there, having gone through the event, having had that experience. And I'll include some links to video and further descriptions of that. Just wanted to share that because a lot of people don't know firsthand how it felt to be there, to be able to, the pride of being able to see Air Force One come in, the pride of being able to see the president in person. Literally, he was maybe other individuals, the lack of respect in their protest that was in Utica, and the threat of physical violence that was there. I mean, that's the reality from a first-hand point of view that I had there, and I think people need to know that. But with that said, I'm going to go move on to some of the other things that are going on, and I'll talk about them in length. But I'm going to take a quick break, and then we'll be right back, and we'll talk more.
I ain't had your waist. I don't even remember how you taste on my lips. Used to be something I needed. Now I see I had a reason. I was bummed out, stressed out, yeah. Think you made me feel the best I had. For a minute I thought I needed you. Now I'm seeing through all of the reasons that I made up in my head. I'm breaking the habit. I'm breaking the habit. I'm breaking the habits that I had, 'cause look where it's got me. Searching for myself, didn't know I lost me. I ain't no saint. Let the devil have a way. I regret it every day. I was bummed out, stressed out, yeah. Think you made me feel the best I had. For a minute I thought I needed you. Now I'm seeing through all of the reasons that I made up in my head. I'm breaking the habit. I'm breaking the habit. I'm breaking the I'm breaking the habit. I'm breaking the habit. I'm breaking the I'm breaking the habit. I'm breaking the
Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining me back here at No Soundbites Allowed, the podcast for you about all the issues of the day that take more than just 30 seconds to get out there, to let you know what's really happening. And I do want to thank everyone for being here. As always, I appreciate each and every one of you, everyone who's listening in, because you make the difference, and that's why I do this. You are the reason why, because you deserve to know more, to be able to be informed, no matter how you want to vote or what party you may be, your preference. So I talked a bit about my experience with President Trump, being out there and being at the event as one of the members of the White House press pool that were able to get in there, and having gotten the approval from the White House for that. And I got to tell you the other side of this very briefly, because I think it's important as well. like I mentioned, there was only one news organization up north that were openly and visibly and vocally against President Trump. They were against Representative Claudia Tenney. And their reportage since then has reflected that. But when I came back on Tuesday, when I was down back home in the Binghamton area, still a little tired because it had been a long day. I'd been up for over 36 hours at that point. I was able to get onto the local WNBF news radio program. It's the only talk radio program in the Southern Tier. And I got on there because there were some reporters from Press Connects who did not go to the event and were not approved because they didn't ask to be able to get approved. That was a process that you had to start a week earlier, and they didn't do it. And they asked last minute on Monday, I believe, to try and get approval, and they didn't. And so they were very upset, and they said that, well, President Trump wasn't allowing people to be able to get out there. Well, that's just not true. You had to go and get approved by Secret Service, had to do a background check on you, and you had to get approved by the White House. They never went through that process. That's why they weren't able to go. And so they were talking down about the event that they didn't even know about, that they weren't there. They didn't go through the right process at the Press Connects or Press and Sun newspaper. And so, and the host of WNBF, Bob Joseph, was also mentioning how he thought it was a very odd thing that the press were being denied access to the event. And so I said, hey, I'll get onto the program because that wasn't accurate. And when I got on there and I was able to speak, I did ask him, I got on, I said, hey, I want to talk about my firsthand experience, just like I described to you, a little bit more briefly I was expecting, but to give my firsthand experience of the honor of being able to be part of the White House pool, to be one of the few members of the Southern Tier to be up at the event, and to also be one of the few people who were out amongst the crowds and covering the protest, because no one really had that firsthand knowledge down in the Southern Tier. And which is 2 hours, just for people who are not familiar, that's a 2-hour difference, about 2.5 hours between Utica and Binghamton. So it's very different politically, economically, in almost every aspect, very different cities and very different areas in New York State. And so that's why I wanted to get on. And I have to tell you, it's interesting that I spent, out of 10 minutes that I was on the airwaves with WNBF, I spent 8 minutes with the host grilling me about my background and my history. We spent 8 minutes talking about me as a political commentator for the last 12 years, that we were speaking about one of his direct quotes, and I have the actual audio of everything that was said in there, and I'll provide that link. People will be able to see it as a video. I put in the only thing I added were photos of myself and the host talking, but you can hear every word that was said there. And out of about 7-8 minutes of this 10-minute conversation, he's telling me why was I special to be able to get to the event? Why was I approved by the White House? And, what is it about me as a political commentator, the only independent individual to be able to cover this event? I was the only one who was not with a network, and I was allowed. And he was upset because he didn't go and he didn't get approved. Well, the fact is I went through the process. I asked for it, and that was on the White House. And as for myself, I have 12 years of doing this, of doing the political commentary in written form, in podcasts, in videos, covering the events around here. And, I try to be very fair-handed. When I speak with Democrats, I've been very fair-handed with them. I've given everyone an opportunity to speak. I've extended it to Anthony Brindisi this year, as I did last time with Kim Myers. I've offered it to Democrats, Republicans, conservatives, libertarians who've been running in races throughout the area. You've heard, you can look up the podcast where I have interviews with several of them. County Executive Jason Garnar, Assemblywoman Donna Lepardo, a couple of the libertarian candidates that are running, Sean Szymanski and Eric Bosworth. So it's not like I don't make the effort to include everyone and try and be very even-handed in those interviews. But it seems that the host really couldn't stand that. And I advise you, check the links on the podcast. You'll be able to see that conversation and evaluate it for yourself. I thought it was just out of bounds. But that being said, let's go forward. And since we're talking about President Trump, I wanted to address something that I thought was really interesting because it also hasn't been. It's kind of like that experience with WNBF. There was a focus that has nothing really to do with the things that are going on in the nation, but the news media is very focused on it. Just like NBF was very focused on trying to detract and discredit me for being able to be approved by the White House and the Secret Service to be able to cover the president. We see in news they're using this woman, Omarosa, to be able to discredit the president. And it's kind of odd because the big accusation is, well, she has tape of people alleging that President Trump used the N-word in conversation. And they're very upset about that. And they're trying to get people of color, especially black people, to be upset about this. That this proves that President Trump is a racist. And oh my God, President Trump is alleged by a third party to have said this. And they have tapes where people are talking about whether or not the president did in fact use the N-word. And so far, everybody who's involved on these tapes, these secret tapes that were made, have denied that they have heard the president use the N-word, and there is nothing on the tape that actually says the president used the N-word. But that's not the big thing. The thing is, my point is, and what if he did? Let's assume for a moment that the president did in fact use the N-word. Does it matter? Does it matter? When we're talking about an environment right now in the world where how many, let's think about it, since 1992, how many entertainers have become filthy rich, mega millionaires by using the N-word? How many? Most recently is Lamar Kendrick. And there's a dichotomy in this nation because Lamar Kendrick and many of these entertainers are black and they're using the N-word, or Hispanic and they're using the N-word. But then when we see whiter people who are white and they're entertainers or even fans of these entertainers and they use the N-word, suddenly there's this outrage. An outrage. There's an article about this which can be found over at Billboard, and they're talking about the fact that and I'm quoting from the article which came out, Kendrick Lamar, N-word white fans. The commodification, they say, quote, the commodification of black cool hasn't led to any significant shifts in the way that white America sees black people. It's only made it easier for audiences to wear the cool as a costume while remaining oblivious or indifferent to the oppression in which that coolness is forged, end quote. And you can look at the article. I'll have the link in there. Well, let's think about this for a second. So it's cool to use the N-word if you're black, but if you're white, it's not. But meanwhile, the reason why these black entertainers are making so much money is because white people are buying and using those very same terms. They've made it popular. We've made it common. Walk down a street in New York, and the article goes into this. If you're not on a spotlight, if you're not on some public stage or being recorded by the news media, and you're just talking with people, you walk down the street, you will hear kids of all ages and all colors and descriptions using the N-word. I personally can't stand it. I think it's insulting and it's aggravating, no matter who's using it and no matter what context. But I don't control the world, and I shouldn't. But that's what we see. And so we see that as a commonality right now, that this is the way we have made the world. This is how entertainment has foisted this upon us. And this is how the youth look at it. It is a common thing to say, especially when you're not in the news media focusing on you with a spotlight. So if that's the case, and that these words are being used depending on the terms or the situation, then, and it's acceptable under that kind of circumstance, why is anyone upset if the president did use the N-word? Why? Because he's white? What about Eminem or the fans of all the rappers who use the N-word? What about the kids walking down the street who are using the N-word? Are we just as upset with them? Is it racist because they're using it? let's get some kind of clarity here, because I don't understand. I personally don't like it if anyone uses it, but that seems to be the minority opinion right now. That seems to be the position that's just wrong. I'm closed-minded, and I can't do that. That's wrong for me to say that the N-word shouldn't be used by anyone, because many of the progressives out there are saying, no, the N-word's perfectly fine to say, depending on who you are. And see, that's that slippery slope where sometimes it's okay or sometimes it's not okay, depending on who you are and what you believe. Well, that's wrong. That is such a segregationist and racist kind of viewpoint. Either it's okay or it's not okay. Either it can be said by anyone or it can't be said by anyone. And when you start throwing in these, well, if you happen to be born at this time of the world and you're this shade of a person and you have this kind of political belief, well, you can do these kind of things. Are you kidding me? That's not a rule. That's not even a guideline. That's just, you make it up as you go. I like you today, so you can say the N-word. Tomorrow, when you say it, oh, well, no, that's bad. Oh, but you can support someone who's using the N-word. I mean, what is this? There's no consistency here, and there's no logic behind it. Either the word means something that's very powerful and negative, as I believe, or the word doesn't. Either it's wrong for President Trump and every rapper and every kid on the street walking down the block to use the N-word, or it's not. It's one or the other. You can't have both. It doesn't have that dual kind of meaning. Not, at least not, I can't see that. But I'd love to have someone truly explain to me why. And I understand the wording is, well, black people can use it because that means it's an expression of power for them because they're taking back the word. They've changed the meaning. Well, if they change the meaning, then it doesn't matter who says it. If the meaning has changed for the word, then it doesn't matter who says it because it doesn't have the same meaning. But they're like, no, but it has the same meaning for white people. Well, that means it has the same meaning. The meaning hasn't changed. So it still means what it means. So either Omarosa in her allegation is completely valid or it's completely made up. And the fact that it's not validated by anyone and there is no proof of this makes it just a fishing expedition, going out there and just trying to find a way to rile up people. Where the real question should be, what is this word offensive or not? Let's have that discussion. Is it an offensive term or is it not? It can't be both. Because there's no way to determine how, if you're saying, well, the way certain people use it is offensive. How do you know it's in their mind? How do you know it's offensive? Especially when it's being used by every kid down the block, when it's in the radio every day, when you buy records that are filled with this. How can you tell me what the intent is of someone else using it, like in Australia with Kendrick Lamar, where someone was brought onto a stage to recite a song that's very popular, that has this term repeatedly in it, and because that woman was white, well, she was shunned because she was doing what the entertainer asked her to do on his own material, and she's a fan of his. That's just crazy. So is the N-word a bad word or is it a good word? For me, I'm a 50-year-old black Hispanic. It's a horrible word. I can't stand it. I don't like anyone using it in any context because it pisses me off, because I understand the meaning of the word. But if you're telling me that that's not the case, then I can't see why anyone using it would be bad then, because that's just the situation. It's the reality of the meaning of the word. So that's something I wanted to address. Omarosa, I don't care about her. I don't care about this issue other than people are playing on other people's emotions to do this, using this sliding scale of justification that no one can truly understand. There's no set rule. It's ridiculous. And the fact that they're using this to try and attack a president, and I don't care which president, you could be Obama, it could be anyone, using this sliding scale is just ridiculous. That is just using emotion to try and get a political agenda approved. They're just trying to attack people. And this is just a way to get people to attack without thinking about the fact of Well, is the word actually offensive or not? Where does it stand in the lexicon of our nation and our culture? That's the thing we should be asking about. And that's the bigger question. Now I'm going to take a quick break here, and I'm going to come right back. And I want to talk about Cuomo, the Cuomos, both Chris Cuomo and Andrew Cuomo, because that really needs to be talked about. It's just insane. And I really want to talk about them because I just don't understand it. But we'll be right back in just 1 second. And I look forward to continuing the conversation with you here on No Sound Bites Allowed.
I say, lady, I'm feeling like we ain't got no damn patience. Excuses why we cannot do this face to face, and then we cry, wonder why we ain't on the same damn page. If there's one thing I know, it's that this world keeps turning. No one seems concerned. Whoa, that this world keeps turning. That's one thing I learned. Cause mama don't sleep at night since the sun done up and down. Ain't no brother's keeper. And no one looking out for the sisters either. And these families ain't no families. No one giving second chances. I don't understand why. It seems like this world keeps turning. No one seems concerned. Yeah. Lately I'm feeling like you don't see me the same way. Excuses, but it's written on your face, and then we fight another night. This time we've been wasted. No, I don't understand why we could have it all, throw it all away, just cause everything don't go our way. Why? Just take a look outside, people losing lives. I'm just trying to see this world is much bigger than you and I. Lady, I'm feeling like we could make this all okay. No excuses, girl, we need to find a way and take our time and do this right before this all fades away. Cause if there's one thing I learned, it's that this world keeps turning. If there's one thing I learned, it's that this world keeps turning. No one seems concerned. It's that this world keeps turning. No one seems concerned. It's that this world keeps turning. No one seems concerned.
Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining me back here at the No Sound Bites Allowed podcast. I'm always happy to be here with you, your host, Michael Voss, the Dragon of the Southern Tier, and I appreciate each and every one of you. I thank you for listening to this episode, which is a little longer than usual, but I do thank you for that. As I'm going through all these different things that are going on this week, it's just a lot of information to try and go through. And hopefully I'll be able to get all of it. I hope everyone is enjoying this, or at least finding it interesting as we try and go into some of these things in more than just the 30 seconds that we tend to hear in most programs. And by the way, I should mention, this is episode, I believe, 98 or 99. 98 or 99. We're about to have our 100th episode of the No Sound Bites Allowed podcast. We're about 100. I've done about 160 different podcasts episodes in total, part of the 5,000 hours of material that I've done over the years. And so I thank you, and I appreciate everybody who's helped us get to this point where we've gotten over 100 of these done. But the reason why we're back now, I wanted to go into Chris Cuomo and Governor Cuomo. A lot of people haven't talked much about Chris. I mean, right now everybody's, and it's funny how the news moves. First, they're talking about President Trump and his arrival at Utica. They immediately go into Omarosa, changing the story, trying to create more emotion about that. And then they switched immediately to Chris Cuomo, talking about how he believes that Antifa is correct in suggesting violence. He's actually defending it. I mean, there's an article at Real Clear Politics. CNN's Chris Cuomo defends Antifa, attacks on police, journalists not equal to fighting. This is incredible. This is an incredible article. And that was 2 days ago. That's just wrong. And, how can we justify that? How do you justify, the full article title is CNN's Chris Cuomo defends Antifa attacks on police, journalists not equal to fighting bigots. This is crazy. This is crazy. What do you mean journalists aren't equal to fighting bigots? Of course they are. That's what the news media does. Inform the people. Let the people know, and the people will make a difference. That's how we got the whole civil rights movement, is that the people took action. And the news media reported that people were taking action against bigots. But guess what? We didn't see Martin Luther King using violence. We saw the violence coming from the people we were trying to stop. And that's important. The fact that Antifa is using violence is not helping out. The fact that they're using violence against police or anyone else, and protesters, individuals expressing their thoughts, that doesn't make them right. It doesn't make their actions right. Just because someone disagrees with it doesn't mean it's right. If Martin Luther King had been running around the nation with his supporters, attacking police and attacking whites who were maybe agreeing or disagreeing with him, do you think we would have had the civil rights movement that we had? No, it was the fact that he wasn't being violent and that he was trying to be calm, to express his ideas and to show everyone that we are equal and that there is a rationale to it, not some hyperactive violence just running around looking for a target. And that's what we see with Antifa. Antifa are active racists, and they're doing exactly the same thing that we saw in the South. We saw them going out there and attacking people for having a different idea, for having a different belief. There is no difference between Antifa and KKK in that sense. They are doing the same exact thing. They attack individuals for having a belief and an understanding that is different than theirs. And to have anyone in the news media justify that is insane. And this is horrendous. And just because they're Democrats doesn't mean, and I don't care if they're the Democratic fringe, they don't get justified to have violence just because someone doesn't agree with them. What, if someone doesn't agree about the way you vote, then they're going to have violence against that. If someone doesn't agree with the clothes that you wear, are they going to have violence about that? Because guess what? We've seen that. We've seen people there was the kids, the teenagers in the restaurant not long ago, and I did a segment about that, where the kid was just attacked because he wore a MAGA hat by a grown adult. Really? And that was in Texas. And that was an assault. That's insane. But what Chris Cuomo is saying is that's perfectly justified, because that person with the MAGA hat, the Make America Great hat, because they wore that, well, that's an expression of support of the president. And because Chris Cuomo believes the president is a bigot, it justifies the violence. Really? No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. If someone had gone up to President Obama or one of President Obama's supporters and said that President Obama is a racist because of the beer summit that he had, and saying that Bill Gates was right and the police were wrong when he had no idea what happened. And if someone had said, well, you support President Obama, let me attack you because of that, you would have said that's a racist. How is Antifa different? Because of what they believe in? Well, that's no different than what the KKK believes in. They have a belief system. That doesn't mean that they're entitled to use violence to push that forward. That isn't how it works in America. And Chris Cuomo doesn't seem to believe that, because Chris Cuomo believes he's right and everyone else is wrong. Because if you're not on the same page as him on that belief, that fringe democratic belief, well, then you must be an evil person. And it's obviously genetic for him because his brother, Governor Andrew Cuomo, has a similar belief system. Remember, it was in 2012 that Governor Cuomo told everyone in New York State and around the world, he made it very public in his comments when he said, if you believe in God, if you believe in your guns, get out of New York. If you're a conservative, get out of New York. That he wants to make New York State the progressive capital of the nation, that the ideals of progressivism, of socialism, of the fringe far left is exactly what he supports. And that includes having the government involved in your personal lives. That's with the SAFE Act, that's with taxation, that's with the red flag legislation. He believes that, well, government's always right, an individual is wrong, and individuals don't matter. Groups of people, categories of people do matter. That if you're in the proper checkbox today, then you are the right person. And if it's, depending on how they want to look at it, tomorrow in those checkboxes, maybe you're the wrong person. And that's insane. That goes back to the whole thing with Omarosa and the N-word with music, and who is right to use the N-word and who's not right to use the N-word. It's a flow chart. Your rights are a flow chart. Whether you're in the right side or the wrong side of these issues is a flow chart, depending on so many categories that has absolutely nothing to do with who you are, what you believe, and what you actually say. No. To the Cuomos, if you happen to be on the wrong, if you're not on their side, well, then you're wrong and violence is okay, according to Chris Cuomo. And according to Governor Cuomo, well, America was never great in the first place, and we're not a great nation. We don't deserve to be the leaders of the world then, I suppose, and therefore these things are all perfectly fine to be able to impose government on individuals, because obviously in his worldview, if America was never great, it's because we had the wrong ideas. And so he wants to have his ideas, because he wants to run for president, and he's the governor of New York. He wants his ideas imposed on the people so that we will be in the right mindset, so that we can become great the way he looks at it, the way that he envisions it. Regardless of the fact that his entire family has benefited from the freedom in America to be able to have governors in the family, to have Chris Cuomo on CNN, to make the money that they make, and to be able to express themselves as freely as they do. You couldn't do that in another nation. The Cuomos weren't royalty, but they became politicians and able to influence people. And if that isn't considered greatness, to come from nothing and suddenly be able to have that kind of power and that kind of wealth, then I don't know what is, because you can't do it anywhere else in the world. And to say that violence is okay to affect people because you don't like what they have to say. Again, the feeling thing. Because they have a feeling, and if you don't have that same feeling, well, we can use violence against you. Or we can use the government against you. We can use laws against you. I mean, that's what he said. If you don't agree with him, Governor Cuomo, this is, if Governor Cuomo and Andrew Cuomo, when he said, if you don't agree with him, get out of New York State. Well, 1.2 million people have gotten out of the state, and the state isn't doing better. According to Tom DiNapoli, the comptroller for New York, we're losing money. Not only are we losing money, we're going to have $18 billion in debt in New York State alone. $18 billion in debt is more than half the money in the world. The national GDP for half the nations in the world. I mean, they don't make that much money, and we're going to owe it as a state because of the economic policies, because Governor Cuomo believes that America isn't great, so he has to institute greatness, that he has to institutionalize from the government greatness and impose it on the people, which is an absolute aberration and absolutely abhorrent to the Constitution and the foundation of this nation. I don't understand it. It doesn't make sense to me. And this is why they justify why they don't like President Trump, because President Trump doesn't agree with having government tell everyone what to do and when to do it. That because, President Trump and Republicans and anyone else who voted for them. Remember, what was it, 3 weeks ago, 4 weeks ago on CNN? They were having their Democratic guest speakers on the program talk about how if you voted for President Trump, well, you're a Nazi. This is the viewpoint that they have on the far left. Listen to Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Listen to Cynthia Nixon, who are into the whole idea of socialism and communism, that they want the government to have control over your lives and your choices because you don't know how to make a right choice, because you've made the wrong choices. And they agree with, well, Cynthia Nixon saying that she never said that Governor Cuomo was wrong in saying that America was never great. She just said that, well, he's not, if that's his approach to gain votes from the far left, it's not going to work. That's what she said. Notice she didn't say it was wrong. Anthony Brindisi today on WMBF was speaking about this, and he too said, and this is a very interesting thing, said as well that he thought that Governor Cuomo was wrong. He didn't say that he is willing to take action about it. That, okay, Governor Cuomo's wrong, but he doesn't, and because of that, he doesn't support him. He didn't say that. He doesn't say that while I've been in the assembly, because Governor Cuomo was wrong, I've opposed him and have tried to stop him from doing all the things he's doing. No, he voted for these things. There's a big difference there. It's a difference that's not being discussed. It's a sliding scale of justification, kind of like I said, with the Omarosa and the N-word. Depending on the day, there's a different flow chart that you use to try and determine, well, are you right or are you wrong, and where you stand, and who's important and who's not. This is scary. These are terrifying things. To hear a governor come out and say that he thinks the nation that he's a part of, that he's part of the leadership of, is never great, and that he doesn't believe in this, is terrifying to me. And that he wants to impose his ideas of what greatness is on the people. That's terrifying. I don't understand how he could even be in an election and think he's going to win by making those statements. And yet he leads everyone else, all of his opponents, by 20 points. He has 5 opponents. He leads them by at least 20 points each. I don't understand how you can get that. How is that even possible when you say that you just don't like, that you have no love of the country that you're in charge of the people in the states that you're in charge of? And then in his own family, part of his own family also believes that using violence against those people that don't believe in the things that either of the Cuomos believe, violence is okay. Does that mean that Chris Cuomo is telling his brother Andrew Cuomo that he should use the National Guard and the police to try and violently impose his viewpoints on what would be great, which apparently is open borders and reduction in the number of police, and to take things, the possessions and the wealth of individuals in the state, and give it to illegal aliens from other countries? That's the trade-off? That's what he thinks is greatness? To take your stuff, that's you, every listener, to take your car, to take your home, to take your money, and take that away from you and your kids and give it to someone else who broke into the nation illegally and doesn't have the skills to be able to do anything in this nation, and to give it to them just because they showed up at the door. And he wants to do that because America's not great. And to make America great, he needs your stuff, not his, yours. And if you don't want to do it, well, his brother says, you know what? If they don't want to do that, then let's go use some violence to get them to take it from you. That's a scary thought. It's terrifying. It really makes me upset. And I don't understand how we can calmly accept these things, and that we have individuals in the Democratic Party who are part of the leadership of that party, like Anthony Brindisi, Nancy Pelosi, Maxine Waters, Senator Chuck Schumer, Kirsten Gillibrand, that they're out there and they're supporting these ideas. Not only directly supporting them by saying these kinds of things, but also indirectly supporting them in being able to enact laws and help have and make sure that these individuals with these ideas get elected. That they're helping to support these ideas and move them forward. So whether they say I agree or not, are you supporting that campaign to get that person elected? Yes. Well, then, yeah, you do support it. You do support this idea because you're trying to get that person elected, not someone else. That you're actively promoting that. Are you trying to pass the laws like the red flag laws, New York State SAFE Act? Are you supporting these things? And by the way, Anthony Brindisi, just as a clarification, no, he did not vote for the New York SAFE Act. Yes, he has voted for both of the red flag laws. Again, confusion. Doing two different things. Why is there that confusion where you're having the government come in and impose things on the individual? Why is that the case? How can you tell me that you don't support these ideas when your actions are supporting these ideas? We really need to have that conversation in this nation. We really need to discuss that and try and get some clarity here and take this away from some kind of flow chart and make this into a straight line where we understand this is where you are. This is what you believe, and these are the consequences of that. Because today you can't figure it out. They're jumping all over the place. And we really need to understand that. Because both of the Cuomos are making statements that are terrifying. And if you were to put those words into the mouths of a conservative, of a libertarian, of a Republican, the public would be outraged, and the media would be leading the charge, telling you you can't possibly say that. That is wrong. If someone on the right or a conservative or a libertarian were to say you should use force against Black Lives Matters and Antifa and Citizen Action, if they ever said that, the left would go insane. The news media would say this is absolutely Germany all over again, and they'd be absolutely losing their minds. So why is it fair for Black Lives Matters, Antifa, and the far left to turn around and use violence against others? Why is it right for the government to impose its will on the people, as Governor Cuomo has been trying to do and has successfully done over the last 8 years? It's a really interesting question. But we've been here for a while today, a little bit longer than usual. So I want to thank everyone for this. I still have to finish my speech for Monday. I have to prepare for speaking with Heather L. Micah tomorrow in an exclusive interview. And we'll be here on Saturday doing the Facebook Live podcast. I look forward to doing that with you as well. And so many other things that are coming up near term. But I want to thank everyone for being here with me today. And I'm going to leave you with a song, and then we'll go forward from there. I'll talk to you again soon.
I bring the matches, you bring the gasoline. Let's do it right, oh let's make a scene. There's no survivors, no survivors on this road we're on. Lead me astray, you little pussycat. Let's take this day and make it a disaster. Oh, I know what you're after. Happily ever after ain't a joke to you. Still the hand won the night. Yes, Lord, will you please spare this life? He said no. There's no survivors on this road. I'll bring the matches, you bring the gasoline. Let's do it right, oh let's make a scene. There's no survivors, no, no, no survivors on this road wrong. There's no survivors, no, no, no survivors on this road.